Lebanon is living through one of the most volatile chapters in its multi-generational confrontation with Israel. Since March, a new war and a fragile, frequently broken ceasefire have left much of the south in ruins. Hundreds of thousands of people are still unable to go home. A US-brokered framework signed in Washington in June was meant to chart a path out of the war. Instead, it has divided the country. And at the centre of it all, Hezbollah. Written off as defeated barely a year ago, the group appears to have clawed its way back, and not for the first time. In late 2024, Israel assassinated its leadership and detonated thousands of booby-trapped pages and radios. Many declared the movement finished. Yet by March, it had joined the regional war, striking Israel in retaliation for the killing of Iran's Ayatollah Khameinei. Israel responded with a ground invasion and airstrikes reaching as far as Beirut. Yet still, Hezbollah fights on and is shaping events across the region. Our special correspondent, Daniel Hilton, has just returned from Lebanon, where his reporting revealed how Hezbollah survived, how gamers became its drone pilots, and how a frustrated Donald Trump demanded a direct line to the group and was denied. Daniel joins me now. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Having just returned from Lebanon, what were your observations on the ground? Could you see and feel the effects of the war?
So I lived in Lebanon for 5 years, which were the best years of my life. So it was great to be back. The last time I had been there was on my way back from Syria in December 2024, which was about 3 weeks after the that 15-month ceasefire came in. And the first kind of sort of Israeli war on Lebanon had paused. Back then, it was like I felt that the country was in a sort of worse place. It might have been because it was December, so everything's a bit more miserable in December than in the summer. So things seemed to, like at first glance, to be a bit of a better place in Lebanon this time. But actually, I think sort of once I sort of looked a bit closer, I was there for a bit longer. I think that, it's just gone, like the country's gone through so much over the past few years. The economic crisis is so bad. And I think that everybody's just sort of, their nerves are frayed. The, power situation is terrible. And nobody really thinks that the war with Israel is over. So everybody's kind of looking over their shoulders a bit.
Now, let's talk about Hezbollah, because in September 2024, just before you were last there, we were all but told Hezbollah was defeated. Its leadership and its headquarters had been pretty much eliminated. There were those pages attacks. How did Hezbollah rebuild from then?
Yeah, I think I thought it was on its knees, and I think quite a lot of people in Hezbollah thought that the game might be up as well. But I think they took stock of where they were, sort of looked at what had been destroyed, what hadn't, and went into kind of survival mode. During that sort of 15-month ceasefire period between the two wars, they were being struck almost daily by Israel. But they were still managing to reorganize the military wing. I think they looked back at a kind of sort of guerrilla-style combat that had been so effective against the Israelis in the first few decades of Hezbollah's existence, and tried to sort of go back to that model because the military wing had become so overlarge. It had become a kind of sort of conventional army in some ways that had worked okay in Syria. But in this kind of sort of fast-moving situations within Lebanon, they found that it really, really wasn't effective, and they kind of just chopped it all up and gave it these kind of sort of new guidelines. Each unit had a kind of playbook of sort of scenarios so that it could operate on its own without any kind of sort of central command. And that's made it a lot more flexible and able to kind of go into a kind of sort of to work on a sort of combat footing that is sort of more familiar, I think, to the party. Politically, Hassan Nasrallah was killed, so was his sort of deputy and presumed successor, Safi ad-Din, who were big heavyweights, and then Naim Assam, who was a kind of sort of familiar figure to many, like to many journalists. He was sort of people, you'd see him around on the ground at press conferences and that kind of thing, and he assumed power as the Secretary General. People have sort of been quite critical of him previously. He has none of the kind of charisma that Nasrallah certainly had. But he's sort of actually managed to steady the ship somewhat, restructuring Hezbollah on the political side. And, at a really, really difficult time, the whole time, he's been under threat of assassination as well from Israel. So I think that on the sort of political and the military side, there was a lot of restructuring that happened that they did in quite an effective way.
Now, before we go more into that sort of new Hezbollah, I want to pick up on something from your reporting, which was that around this time when everyone thought Hezbollah was defeated, one of your sources, an official who spoke on condition of anonymity, one of them said that the US and the state of Lebanon missed an opportunity to absorb Hezbollah. When was this, and how did they let it slip by?
I think this was around the kind of turn of the year between 2024 and 2025, when, Hezbollah really seemed on its knees, and there were serious conversations, which are still going on, about disarmament, how Hezbollah could exist in any form, whether that would just be a political party or whether it can still be an armed movement. And then I think that a lot of Hezbollah's enemies, including Gulf Arab states, Israel, Washington, its domestic enemies, sort of some of the parties that are its rivals domestically, really kind of sort of pushed very hard and thought, okay, we can trap Hezbollah, we can sort of force it into maximalist concessions. And that, in a way, sort of pushed it into a corner where it became more intransigent, where it was less likely to acquiesce to certain conditions and demands, because it felt that that everybody wanted it to be completely defeated, wiped off the map, and so that had a sort of the opposite effect and sort of dug Hezbollah in to Lebanon politically and militarily, as well. That's the way that the sources put it anyway.
Where are the Lebanese people in all this? Because it's one thing for Hezbollah to reform militarily, redefine itself politically. Has it managed to build its popularity up? I mean, how much of Lebanon blame Hezbollah for the current difficulties from Israel, and how many of them have rallied around Hezbollah in the face of Israel's aggression?
Yeah, well, so first of all, Lebanon is an incredibly diverse place.
Tell me how the Lebanese
think. I would say that it's complicated. There are definitely opinion polls that show that many, if not most, Lebanese want complete disarmament of Hezbollah. There is other private polling that my colleague Adam Shamsuddin, who I worked with in Lebanon on this story, has been privy to, which was kind of backed by a Sunni Arab state, that showed that actually kind of popular opinion was sort of growing in favor of Hezbollah, and so that polling was never publicly released. I would say amongst Hezbollah's core Shia support base and membership, there were definitely questions being asked about the price that the community has had to pay to be associated with Hezbollah. I mean, Israel and Israeli officials, ministers, and and the military are using explicitly genocidal language about Lebanon's Shia, and is directly targeting the towns and villages which are majority Shia in the south. Many of which have been completely wiped off the map. One source in the party described it as just kind of 5 kilometers deep of football pitches, because there was just no structures at all, sort of Hackney Marsh transplanted into South Lebanon. But having said that, what are the alternatives for the community? Not a lot. Nobody's really offering them anything. Right. There's no real organised opposition, and I think the Shia feel under existential threat, so I think sort of some of the support is galvanising around Hezbollah and Amal at the moment.
Now let's talk more about this sort of guerrilla-style combat tactics that you say Hezbollah is returning to. Yeah. You paint a picture in which young gamers controlling cheap drones is sort of the new military stronghold of the group. How did that come to pass, and how effective is that against Israel's military?
Yeah, so first of all, gamers being kind of key in drone wars in the sort of 21st century is not novel. Like, we've seen it in Ukraine, where a lot of people who, played sort of shoot 'em ups were sort of adept at flying these drones and using them for combat. The kind of funny thing with these gamers in Lebanon was that I think a lot of more senior or older Hezbollah members would see these kids fighting these fictional wars cooked up by American programmers and think, God, like, what are the kids up to these days? And then it turned out that they were really good at fighting the enemy with this kind of new, drone warfare that everybody's kind of sort of doing in 2026. The drones themselves are operated using fiber optic cables. In the 2024 war with Israel, Hezbollah debuted a rocket that was sort of using some of the similar technology, but they seem to have repurposed a lot of that tech to plow into their drone program, which they've really stepped up. Using sort of 3D printing plus like all the kind of fiber optic cables. I can sort of imagine these reams of fiber optic cables that had just been sort of sitting around. They thought, okay, let's use it for drones, and they have been really effective against Israeli troops and tanks and APCs in South Lebanon. I mean, Benjamin Netanyahu called them a central threat to Israel, and the tactic that Hezbollah is using now is quite different from what it was using before, which is that they're happy to relinquish territory to Israeli troops, but just make sure that they're never settled, that they can never do what they did in 2024, which is fortify any of those positions to turn them into permanent bases, which Israel managed to do in 2024 in 5 points along the Lebanese-Israeli border, which kind of cements Israeli presence in South Lebanon. And it's anathema for Hezbollah to allow that to happen again.
How dependent is this version of Hezbollah on Tehran for its provisions, for its supplies? Because I imagine that's become pretty difficult right now.
Yeah. I mean, the fall of Bashar al-Assad in Syria has been, sort of devastating in terms of Hezbollah's supply lines. And also, there's been a lot more restricted aviation between Tehran and Beirut, and So Hezbollah have sort of had to go it alone a bit. Financially, they've been under a lot of strain, and sort of militarily, I think there was a time in the 2024 war where all of these kind of senior commanders and leaders in Hezbollah had been killed. So had their deputies. So had some of those deputies as well. And Iran flew in their equivalents from the Revolutionary Guard, but they don't. Our sources in the party sort of suggested that they don't really need that Iranian oversight on the ground at the moment, because particularly militarily, the Lebanese fighters have fought a lot of conflicts recently. They're pretty adept, but on a kind of strategic level, I would say there's, from what we heard, a lot of coordination at the moment. People are sort of keen to stress that within that, Hezbollah has autonomy. So, for instance, Iran, we were told that Iran was sort of urging Hezbollah to respond to the repeated Israeli violations of the 15-month ceasefire before the Iran war kicked off. But Naim Assam and the rest of the party's leadership sort of felt, no, we're not ready yet, we're still rebuilding, we don't want to sort of provoke a war or sort of, escalate a situation that would be so badly, would reflect so badly on Lebanon. So, there is still autonomy, but whether, the situation has changed with finances particularly, and I think we'll see how that plays out.
Okay, now in May, Donald Trump, US president, you know him, he asked Lebanon's ambassador in Washington for a direct line to Hezbollah. On the 1st of June, he then posted on Truth Social that he'd had a very good call with Hezbollah, and this had led to a pause in attacks. Did this happen?
So there are lots of conflicting accounts over this whole period. It kind of depends who you talk to, but what. So we got this, Adam Shamsuddin and I, from two sources in the party, and one Lebanese official who sort of was, very, very close to things on the diplomatic side, and they all agreed that Trump rang up the ambassador and was like, get me Hezbollah. I want to speak to whoever. One Hezbollah source suggested that sent Lebanese officials into a flap, and they were just sort of calling around anybody they knew that might
they don't know how to reach Hezbollah.
Yeah, they were like, or they didn't quite know the right person to speak to, and so they were sort of calling sort of random sheikhs and like that kind of thing. It has to be said that the sources within the Lebanese state deny that version of events, and their version was that they denied, or that the ambassador said to Trump, "Look, this isn't wise. We'll find, we'd prefer that the channels of communication are through us or through intermediaries, particularly because not even the Lebanese presidency, which is leading the negotiations with Israel and Washington, has direct talks with Hezbollah's leadership at the moment. From the Lebanese state side, it was denied by the ambassador, and that was backed up by President Joseph Aoun. From the Hezbollah side, they said that they would not speak directly to America because it's it's one of their red lines. They wouldn't do that directly, as they do with they don't speak to Israel directly either.
Right. Now, I suppose whether or not Trump managed to get in touch with Hezbollah, he did mediate the framework that is currently in place between Lebanon and Israel. This was signed in Washington in June. It is supposed to chart the path out of the war, but you found deep divisions inside Lebanon, and Lebanon's own deputy prime minister told you that it may not be a binding agreement. What was your main takeaway from your interview with Tarek Mitri?
Yeah, I would say that the one interesting thing that he was sort of very keen to stress was that that it's in no place in the framework is it called an agreement or a deal.
I wasn't totally sure how to script it.
Yeah,
I went with framework.
The framework.
What does that mean?
So I think from what he was trying to sort of put across, it was a sort of starting point, and that in its current form, it's completely unable to pass through the Lebanese government vote, the Lebanese parliament. So far it's been negotiated only through the presidency and the embassy in Washington. And so, there are very few people in Lebanon and in the Lebanese authorities that have any ownership of it in its current form. One thing that a senior Hezbollah official, Nawaf Moussaoui, sort of was keen to stress to us was that the Lebanese state, and I use state rather than government because this is not like the sort of the cabinet that's been negotiating this. It's the presidency and the sort of the state has been going to these negotiations with Israel with really no leverage at all, and hence the kind of sort of terrible outcomes in this framework, which is so sort of weak and passive on the Lebanese side, and seems to sort of not secure a lot of really basic things like a withdrawal from South Lebanon by Israeli troops, or respect for Lebanese sovereignty, and has been roundly criticized even by some of the most fervent supporters of Prime Minister Nawaf Salam and President Joseph Aoun, perhaps not publicly so much, but behind closed doors, everybody was like, this is a bad deal.
Right.
Yeah.
And then final question, you've indicated that people you spoke to don't feel like the war is over. They don't feel secure in that reassurance. What about the prospects of internal conflict? There is mounting pressure on the Lebanese state to use the military to forcibly disarm Hezbollah. What is the likelihood of that triggering internal conflict?
Look, I think talk about any kind of civil war in Lebanon should not be cheap. In living memory for most people in the country, the sort of 15-year civil war that Lebanon suffered through. Having said that, there is genuine concern that Lebanon might see clashes between the army and Hezbollah. Lots of people, Tarek Mitri was like, no, said that the Israelis might want to see that and might be kind of trying to sort of force that, and Nawaf Moussaoui said, it would be suicide for anybody to sort of raise arms against Hezbollah and the resistance, as he described it. But I think there is pressure, certainly from Israel, to some extent from Washington, and from some within Lebanon, for the Lebanese military to take a more kind of sort of proactive, confrontational stance against the party, and that could be really, really dangerous.
Daniel, thank you so much for joining me. It's been great to have you on.
Thank you very much.